existence, transportation has been a priority, especially waterborne transportation. I urge my colleagues to join me in support of this important bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Reserve. Where'd Shaka go? Oh, there you are. Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to a very powerful member of the House Appropriations Committee, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Shaka Fattah.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 2 minutes.
I seek the opportunity to extend and revise my remarks.
Without objection.
I rise in support of this bill, and I want to first of all thank Chairman Schuster and Nick Rahal as ranking member for their hard work, and Tim Bishop. The committee has developed a product that is worthy of this House support, and I rise in support of it. We're almost at the 80th anniversary of the Mississippi River Control Council. We've seen a lot of progress in my part of the country in terms of waterways. I like the work that the committee's done on the Harbor Maintenance Fund. I serve on the Energy and Water Appropriations Committee, as the ranking member has indicated, and the Army Corps, which has taken some hits on this matter. Really, it's the responsibility of the Congress to make this, put us in a position to move forward. Some of the delays that have been occasioned by the environmental assessment have been much too long, and I think that the committee's efforts to shorten that is good. I have some concerns about limitations on dollars, but I know that as this bill goes forward, it'll be perfected even more. So I rise in support, and I hope that many members of the House will find it within their purview to support this important legislation. Thank you very much, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from West Virginia reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's now my distinguished honor to recognize the Majority Leader of the House, Mr. Cantor, for 30 seconds.
Majority Leader is recognized for 30 seconds.
Chairman, thank you very much, and I thank the Chairman from Pennsylvania on his leadership in bringing this bill to the floor. I rise today in support of the Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2013. Our economy remains weak, and many working families are struggling. Many are having a hard time paying their bills, and others are struggling to find work. The American people deserve an efficient, effective, and accountable government that's focused on finding bipartisan solutions that will reignite our economy so those who are looking for a job are able to find one. The legislation before us today will provide a big step in that direction. This is a fiscally responsible bill, one that will create jobs and ensure that America remains competitive in the global economy. It will encourage investing in our national water transportation networks while cutting red tape and streamlining the infrastructure project delivery process. Our waterways and ports support over $1.4 trillion worth of goods each year, and over the next few decades, our trade volume is expected to grow exponentially. Every state in this country and millions of hardworking American families depend on the many parts of our waterway infrastructure to be strong economic arteries. Other countries around the world have been investing in their commercial infrastructure to improve their standing in the global marketplace and so that they can gain a competitive edge. As a result, improving and strengthening our ports and inland waterways is not just an economic desire, it is an economic necessity. This bill authorizes the Army Corps of Engineers to develop, maintain, and build important development projects, streamlines redundant environmental reviews, and establishes a transparent process for future activities with strong congressional oversight. And it does so without any earmarks. This is a common-sense bill that should garner bipartisan support because it will help revitalize our waterways, our ports, and our economy. The American people are counting on their elected leaders to restore trust in our government and faith in our economy, and this bill, again, is an important part of achieving that goal. Again, I'd like to thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Chairman Schuster, and the rest of the members on the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure on both sides of the aisle for their hard work on this issue, and I urge my colleagues in the House to support this legislation. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very happy to yield at this time a minute to the distinguished Majority Whip. 2 minutes. I just thought you got whatever you wanted. To the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer.
You're very kind. Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes or so.
Mr. Speaker, this is how we ought to work. This is how the Congress ought to work with one another, all 435 of us. I don't mean that 435 are going to vote for the bill, but we have worked together on this bill, and I want to congratulate the chairman, Mr. Schuster, whose father would be proud of him and acted in the same way, working together to make things happen for America in a bipartisan way. And I want to congratulate Mr. Schuster, Congressman Schuster, Brother Schuster, I can say. And I want to congratulate Nick Joe Rahal from West Virginia, who has been such a expert on the areas of building America and growing our economy. And I want to thank also Dr. Tim Bishop from Long Island, who has worked so hard on this particular piece of legislation. As I've said many times, Mr. Speaker, from this floor, Congress has a responsibility to take bipartisan action to boost our economy, competitiveness in a way that will create jobs. This bill has the potential, in my opinion, will do exactly that. And while the bill is not perfect, none of them are, by investing in our nation's infrastructure, including ports and waterways, as this bill does, we can lay the groundwork for a more efficient delivery system for American-made products to reach markets in our country and overseas. Promoting and increasing U.S. exports is a core component of the House Democrats, and I might say a bipartisan Make It in America plan for jobs and competitiveness. I hope Democrats and Republicans can work together in a bipartisan way, as Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member Rahal have done with this bill, to move additional pieces of Make It in America legislation to the floor, so we can further promote exports, pursue a national manufacturing strategy, encourage the return of innovation and jobs from overseas, and secure a skilled workforce for the 21st century. Mr. Speaker, I'll support this bill today for what it does to create jobs and improve our waterborne transportation. But I hope that, as the House and Senate develop a final bill, the conferees look closely at the environmental review provisions to make certain that we can strike an appropriate balance between expediting projects while understanding their impact on the environment. I urge my colleagues.
The gentleman is recognized for an
I yield
additional
an
minute.
additional minute.
I thank the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Rahal. I urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to work with us to make sure that our efforts to provide certainty account for the size and complexity of some water projects. If we can continue to act in a bipartisan way, as I know Mr. Schuster and Mr. Rahal will do, we can send a message that Congress is ready to move forward and help more of our people make it in America. And I hope we can tap into this spirit of cooperation by scheduling consideration of a comprehensive immigration reform legislation, which, like this bill, has support from both sides of the aisle, from business, from labor, from religious groups, and from leading nonprofits. That is a challenge, I think, that we can meet this year. And again, I want to congratulate the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Schuster, who has worked hard in a focused and bipartisan way to bring this day to fruition, and I congratulate him. And I thank Mr. Rahal, my good friend, who has worked so diligently over so many years to make sure that people can make it in America, and that America invests in itself. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from West Virginia reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the whip for his kind words. And with that, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Hanna.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the Water Resources Reform and Development Act. I'm privileged to represent Rome, New York, where nearly 2 centuries ago our nation embarked on its first major transportation project, the Erie Canal. This bill before us creates jobs by updating and reauthorizing water infrastructure projects. It reforms the outdated process that allows projects to be approved by the Army Corps of Engineers. This legislation cuts $12 billion from a backlog of outdated projects. It is fiscally responsible and doesn't include a single earmark, a much-needed departure from past water resources development bills. By passing WRRDA, we facilitate trade, keep products moving across America, and create jobs in our communities. Congress has an opportunity before it today to help America do what it does best, compete. We should seize it. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I would like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Bouchon, as a member of the committee.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today in strong support of this WRRDA bill. The bill provides the much-needed oversight of the Army Corps of Engineers, streamlines the environmental review process, and consolidates duplicative analyses of projects that have delayed important infrastructure improvements, sometimes for as long as 15 years. These type of delays have cost our economy billions of dollars and have put the United States at a competitive disadvantage. I'm also pleased that this bill will provide additional funding for smaller ports, like in Mount Vernon, Indiana. The Mount Vernon port has several businesses headquartered on its property and is vitally important to the economy of southwest Indiana. A functioning water transportation system is critical for their success now and in the future. I would like to thank Chairman Schuster, Ranking Member Rahal, Subcommittee Chairman Gibbs, and Subcommittee Ranking Member Bishop for working together on this important piece of legislation that makes government work better for our taxpayers. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West
Chairman,
Virginia.
I continue to reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Chairman Schuster. I rise today as well in support of this bill because it is a jobs bill. And it's not just a jobs bill because the government spends money to create jobs. It's a jobs bill because it builds infrastructure that we need in this country to remain competitive and get our goods to market throughout the world. Having grown up in Corpus Christi, Texas, served by the Port of Corpus Christi, a deep water port on the intercoastal waterways, I know the needs and how important it is to have ports and waterways that are here to serve our nation. It's one of the reasons I'm working with my colleague from across the aisle, Eddie Bernice Johnson, and a variety of other Texas members to support the Texas Port Conference to raise awareness of how critical ports and waterways are to the jobs throughout this nation. And I urge my colleagues to get behind this jobs bill to get America back to work. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's now my pleasure to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to offer my thanks to Chairman Schuster and also my subcommittee chairman, Bob Gibbs. They've done a wonderful job with this bill. It's a bipartisan bill. And I rise today as a co-sponsor and a proud supporter of the WRRDA Act. I like to actually call it WRRDA since we got the extra R. Reform matters. And in this bill, it shows that we can move things forward and we can make a difference. But I got to tell you, Mr. Chairman, it's good to be back here governing this week and focusing on common sense policies like this one here today. Why is WRRDA critical? Because our waterways provide a cost-effective, fuel-efficient way to move our goods, and we must maintain and support U.S. infrastructure. I come from a district that borders the Mississippi and is blessed with productive farmland. 81% of our U.S. ag exports are waterborne, and with trade expected to double by 2021, we must rebuild our capacity. With a $60 billion water project backlog, I believe this program provides a solution to move projects forward. And again, I'm proud to support and co-sponsor this bill. Look forward to helping this committee advance this important legislation through this process and have this bill signed into law by the President.
Gentleman's time
I yield back.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia is
Mr.
recognized.
Chairman, may I have a time check on both sides, please?
Gentleman from West Virginia has 11.5 minutes. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, 6 3/4 minutes.
I continue to reserve balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
At this time, I recognize Mr. Scalise from Louisiana for a purpose of a colloquy.
Thank you.
For how much time?
1 minute.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the chairman of the committee, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, for his leadership at bringing the water bill to the floor. I wanted to talk specifically about the Morganza to the Gulf project. I know the gentleman from Pennsylvania has been down to Terrebonne and Lafourche Parish, has seen this project that's so vital, not only for hurricane protection, but also for protecting the infrastructure that produces 30% of our nation's oil and gas, a lot of the energy infrastructure for our country. And I know the process that's been set up in this bill allows for chief reports once they move forward to then go to the committee for hearings. The chief's report for this project wasn't completed until after the last hearing that your committee had. Just wanted to engage in a colloquy with the gentleman from Pennsylvania to see if there was going to be another committee hearing in the near future to take up new projects that have gotten chief's reports since that time, and to see if Morganza to the Gulf would be one of the projects that we could have on that list.
I'd like to engage with a colloquy, but first I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Louisiana, also Mr. Cassidy, for the purpose of a colloquy.
Thank you. I'd first like to stress that the Morganza to the Gulf project is of immense importance to Louisiana's coastal restoration and protection efforts. It protects both fragile wetlands from hurricane surge and also is environmentally sound. The Corps estimates that it will provide $1 billion in flood-related, it will prevent an estimated $1 billion in flood-related damages annually and protect over 53,000 structures. The Corps supports this project. Their own analysis indicates it will provide over $300 million in annual economic benefit. It's been under study for the last 2 decades, was previously authorized in 2000 and 2007, and as Mr. Scalise notes, recently a completed chief's report was filed which stated the project is economically justified, environmentally sound, and acceptable, and of sound engineering. That said, there is this problem with the late filing of the chief's report. We do need this project authorized, and I ask that the legislation be passed and that it go to conference where Mr. Scalise, Mr. Vitter, and I can all work with the chairman on this. I ask the gentleman from Pennsylvania to please hold these hearings and to review all projects that have received a chief's report.
If I could reserve my answer until I have recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts for a 30-second colloquy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman.
I yield back.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's the exact same situation for Boston. We have our chief's report. It was 2 weeks past the deadline, and I know that we've already spoken. I know that you're more than willing to help us do what we need to do, and I appreciate that. And I'm just here to say thank you.
I appreciate it, gentleman from Massachusetts. And with that, if I could yield 30 seconds for the purpose of a colloquy to the gentleman from California, Mr. Denham.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like everybody else here today, let me thank you for your leadership, not only on this bill, but on the overall Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. It's truly bipartisan. Secondly, I want to talk about the flood control project impacting residents of my district that I've been working on for more than a decade. The chief's report is in Orostimba Creek and San Joaquin River Basin near the city of Newman, located in my district. The Army Corps has officially endorsed the authorization of a plan for flood risk management by constructing a levee along the city of Newman's northwestern perimeter, known as the Chevron Levee. This project is a local partnership with the city of Newman and the county of Stanislaus and was initiated over a decade ago.
Gentleman's time expired.
Gentleman has 15 more seconds, please.
Gentleman's recognized for 15.
Without construction of this levee, the people of the city of Newman and the surrounding area will be at continual risk of flooding resulting from the overflow of Orostimba Creek. In association with the construction of the levee of the city of Newman, will develop and implement an advanced warning system. Mr. Chairman, included in this legislation we're considering today are several chief's reports that were received in time for the committee to review. I ask that your commitment to working with me to ensure the chief's report on Orostimba can be reviewed in this process.
Expired.
I thank the gentleman and all of my colleagues, and at this point I'd like to respond to them. One of the key principles in developing WRRDA was increasing transparency, accountability, and congressional oversight. Without ceding constitutional constitutional congressional responsibility to the executive branch. WRRDA authorizes 23 vital water resources projects that have completed a technical review by the Corps of Engineers and have been recommended by the Corps of Engineers. The committee held a full committee hearing to review all the pending chiefs reports on June 5, 2013. My position has been clear. In order to maintain our constitutional congressional authority, Congress must review the chiefs reports and specifically authorize them. We cannot hand over our authority to the administration and the Corps of Engineers to self-authorize. Chiefs reports have been finalized on the 3 reports that the gentleman have questioned, and we will be reviewed and considered by the committee as we continue to work through WRRDA. To provide strong congressional oversight, I commit to holding a hearing at the appropriate time in the process so that the very important issues are fully considered and have the opportunity to be addressed. And with that, I thank the gentleman for engaging in colloquy.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Hey, you can take that home. You ready? Yeah. You can take that one home.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very happy to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, very valuable member of our Transportation Infrastructure Committee and who has had a tremendous input on this legislation. Mr. DeFazio, 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
I thank the gentleman from West Virginia, the ranking member, and I thank my colleague, Mr. Schuster, the chairman and the subcommittee chair and ranking member. This is a recognition of the extraordinary importance of federal investment in the infrastructure of the United States of America to engage in both domestic and international commerce. Sometimes that seems to be lacking around here. We seem to lump everything the federal government does into one big pot, and if you got something you don't like, it just kind of all gets associated together. This is a program that will be paid for out of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. Yes, there is a trust fund, sorta, kinda. It's got $7 billion of theoretical balance in it. Unfortunately, friends on the Appropriations Committee have seen fit to spend that $7 billion on other things because it's not a real trust fund. This legislation will begin to move us back toward utilizing those dedicated tax dollars in a dedicated way to maintaining the port and maritime infrastructure of the United States of America. I mean, here we are today. The Corps of Engineers has stopped dredging all small ports. Tell you what, that's kind of a disaster in my state, and it's a disaster all around the country. I have one port where they have to take the boats out of the water, onto a dock, and they're having trouble even now getting into that port at high tide to get the boats up onto the dock. I have other channel entrances that are shoaling in, becoming dangerous. We're going to lose lives because the Corps doesn't have the money to do the work. We have jetties that are failing. If we fix them now, $10, $15 million. If they go totally to failure, $50 million. Now, what sense does it make? But we're in the United States of America. We can't afford to do the $10 to $15 million now. We have dams and locks that are failing. We're going to wait till they fail, or are we going to do the repairs now? This bill begins to move us in the direction of doing the repairs that are needed to better move commerce, people, and goods in this country. It's long, long overdue. And the bill has a 10% set-aside, which will be dedicated to the small ports, which is absolutely...
Gentleman's time has expired.
I yield to the gentleman one additional minute.
The gentleman is recognized for additional minute.
You know, this year I had to get my state to partner with the federal government so the federal government would bring the Corps dredges with the Corps crews down to dredge my small ports, paid for by the state of Oregon. My state doesn't have a lot of money, but, you know, we partnered and we did that. There are innovative solutions that will work, too. But long term, we need the full investment. We need the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund dollars to be spent on needed harbor maintenance. As I mentioned earlier, I have a jetty at Coos Bay that's failing. We could fix it now for less or a lot more later. We have the jetty on the Columbia River that's failing. We can fix it now for less or a lot more later. That's repeated all around the country, and I'm glad to see here today the work of bipartisan work here and the agreement on the critical infrastructure role that only the federal government can play, using funds raised federally on imports and into the United States of America, a tariff that's placed on those that is dedicated to these functions. It's a paid-for program. We need it now. I congratulate you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I inquire as to how much time we have remaining?
Has 2.5 minutes remaining.
I would like to yield 30 seconds to the Distinguished Policy Committee Chairman, Mr. Langford from Oklahoma.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 30 seconds.
I just want to be able to bring my support for this bill, but also to be able to talk about the limited funds that the Corps of Engineers has. They have very limited funds because the United States of America obviously has limited funds for what we actually receive from the taxpayers. There is a study within this bill itself that's being proposed that looks at the low priority projects and the things that are not within the core mission of the Corps of Engineers. That study doesn't need to be a study to nowhere. It doesn't need to be a study to look at the low priority inventory and then just go in a drawer and say, gosh, we have low priority inventory that we can't afford to maintain, that's sit closed, and a local municipality can't open it. So we need to be able to establish the next step on that.
I thank that if I may yield myself 15 seconds to respond to the gentleman. I appreciate the gentleman's leadership on it. I agree with him. We need to move forward to get these properties off the Corps' books. So we'll continue to work with the gentleman to make sure we expedite those and make sure the Corps is eliminating things that's not important to their mission. And
Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to yield 2 minutes to another gentleman from Oregon. This particular gentleman's a member of the powerful House Ways and Means Committee and has been a leader on that committee in discussions about financing this nation's infrastructure, but whether they be water, port infrastructure, or highway infrastructure, and I commend him for that leadership. The gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I appreciate the gentleman's courtesy. I feel like I am just a member of the T&I Infrastructure Alumni Association. I deeply cherish the time that I spent on the committee, on the Water Resources Subcommittee, and I appreciate the hard work that the committee has moving forward, trying to find some areas of agreement in a sometimes fractious House and focus on the big picture. What is going to put America in the best position going forward? I'm going to have an amendment coming forward talking a little bit about some of the backlog and some of the NEPA efforts, but one of the fundamental problems we have now is that we are not providing the resources to move the projects forward. The backlog of $60 billion, and there's opportunities here to add to it. The point we want to focus on is being able to deal meaningfully with it so we don't have projects that go stale, that are outmoded, and that are past their shelf life. Another thing that I hope to be able to work with the committee on in the future deals with the principles and guidelines for the Corps that were established in 1983. This was a project of mine for years on the committee. We finally updated them, but they have been stalled by some hold, I think, through the appropriations process that have stymied it. So it's not going forward. These principles and guidelines, if they were adopted in 1983, were clearly in the process in the mid-70s. We've learned a lot over the course of almost 40 years. And I'm hopeful that we can focus on the big picture, get the resources that are necessary to do the job right, and then be able to have the flexibility to make sure that the Corps has up-to-date tools to do its jobs better. I look forward to further debate. I appreciate the gentleman's courtesy and the hard work that the committee has done.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with that, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce.
The gentleman from New Mexico is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm here to support H.R. 3080 and to compliment the ranking member and the chairman for the work they've done in this valuable bill. I support it because it creates jobs and deauthorizes $12 billion in backlog projects that are outdated and do not have construction funds obligated. I do want to point out that there are some issues with the text of the bill that my constituents have brought to my attention. For example, one dam in the 2nd District of New Mexico is awaiting approval from the D.C. Corps of Engineers office, but likely will not get approval until January, with a projected contract awarded in March of 2014. I've been assured by the chairman and the committee staff that the deauthorization language will not target projects like these. The projects in the study, design, and reevaluation phase. I want to thank the chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Yield back.
And I thank the gentleman from the Mexican committee to work with him. May I inquire as to how much time we have left?
The gentleman has 1 minute and 15 seconds. The gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to a very valued member of our committee from the state of Nevada, the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus.
Gentlelady from Nevada is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank the chairman and the ranking members of this important committee for their work on this bill. I'd also like to thank my colleague from California, Mr. Thompson, for his leadership as part of this bill in addressing the enormous challenges that invasive species present to our country's waters. In southern Nevada, you think of that as a desert, but there's a lot of water there. The spread of the quagga mussels is a growing threat to Lake Mead, which contributes nearly $1 billion to the local economy and supplies 90% of southern Nevada's water supply. The spread of quagga mussels in this critical reservoir has led to expensive countermeasures by the Bureau of Reclamation, which is spending nearly $1 billion a year to prevent quaggas from infiltrating the Boulder Dam intakes. The Southern Nevada Water Authority was also forced to redesign the Water Intake 3 project, which is currently underway, to prevent quagga mussels from growing there as well. If unchecked, the mussels can clog the intakes to prevent water from reaching the residents and the visitors to southern Nevada. Likewise, Lake Tahoe, which borders Nevada and California, is on the edge of waterways where quagga mussels have been found and are taking hold. Should quagga mussels establish colonies in Lake Tahoe, the annual impact would be over $22 million a year. The amendment that is part of this bill would direct the GAO to examine the current efforts to address the spread of invasives and to help develop a long-term strategy. So I would urge my colleagues to not only support the bill, but also the amendments, and I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I'm ready to close at this time if the gentleman from West Virginia is ready to close, and if...
Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to give the majority and the chairman an additional 2 minutes from our side.
Objection.
And then I'll be ready to close, which I'll close now.
Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, as we conclude this debate, I want to once again commend our chairman and the subcommittee chairman, Mr. Gibbs, and our ranking member, Mr. Bishop, for the tremendous effort that has been made to bring this legislation where it is today. It started out with Chairman Schuster's leadership early on in this Congress at the member level. It spread to the staff level, and it has continued every day. It's been a transparent process and a process in which we have been in communication with one another. And as I said in the very beginning, I hope this will be a signal of how this committee will bring future pieces of legislation to the floor, and I just hope that it will be a signal to the entire Congress how we should be working closer together in a bipartisan fashion. This legislation has a wide array of supporters. I have a list here of some 5 pages of both labor and industry and business supporters that have written members of our committee in strong support of the pending legislation. They include the American Coal Ash Association, the American Farm Bureau Federation, National Association of Manufacturers, National Association of Home Builders, the American U.S. Chamber of Commerce, friends from our labor, including the carpenters, the transportation trades, AFL-CIO, Laborers International, and many other labor organizations have come together in support of this legislation. And as I summarize and conclude my comments, I want to quote from the President of the Transportation Trades Department, Mr. Ed Whitkin, when he wrote members of our committee that real investment in harbor maintenance is vital to the health of an industry that supports 500,000 jobs, plays a critical role in expanding U.S. exports, and is the gateway to international trade and humanitarian aid. H.R. 3080 will help improve our maritime infrastructure and keep pace with our international competitors, and will also create thousands of good-paying construction and maritime jobs during what remains a slow economic recovery. I urge you to vote in favor of this important legislation. That ends quoting from Mr. Whitkin, and I conclude by again thanking Chairman Schuster for his superb leadership and join with all of my colleagues in urging passage of this vital piece of legislation. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I inquire as to how much time I have total with the 2 minutes that Mr.
The gentleman has 3¼ minutes.
Thank the gentleman, and then thank the other side of the aisle, Mr. Rahal, Mr. Bishop, and their staffs for all the hard work and working together to produce a bipartisan bill, a bill that's full of policy, full of reform, a bill that is fiscally responsible, and I must say the most fiscally responsible WRRDA in the history of WRRDA. There are no earmarks, but we made sure that we did not cede any of our constitutional congressional authority to the executive branch, which I believe is very important for this body and for the Congress. As I said, we've worked together in bipartisan fashion, talking to the stakeholders at roundtables and in hearings, and coming up with a piece of legislation that I'm very proud we have it on the floor today. Again, thanks to Ranking Member Rahal, Ranking Member Bishop, and the entire staff on the minority for working with us so closely. Also, I'd like to thank our staff for the long hours that they put in. My counterpart, Subcommittee Chairman Gibbs, for his efforts, and his staff person, Joe Price, who worked so hard. Also, John Anderson, Jeff Bowman, Jonathan Paulo, Tracy Z from the Water Resources Subcommittee, and in the front office, starting with the leadership of Chris Bertram, the staff director, and a special thanks to the Deputy Staff Director and my longtime staff member, Steve Martinko, for ramrodding this through the committee. I appreciate his support. Beth Spivey, Matt Sturgis, Jim Timon, Jennifer Hall, Claire Doherty, Jim Villamora, Justin Harkerode, Michael Marinacino, sorry Michael if I messed that up, Karen Moore, Denny Wirtz, and Keith Hall. All these folks put in so many hours to make sure that we have on the floor here today a very good product, one that I'm proud to stand behind, one that I urge all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to vote in favor of 3080. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure printed in the bill, it shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print 113-24. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. No amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in House Report 113-251. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for the division of the question. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, as the designee of the manager, I have an amendment at the desk.
Does the gentleman offer amendments en bloc?
I have a manager's amendment, yes. Oh, wait. Mr. Schuster's a manager's amendment. It's not the en bloc.
It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 1, printed in House Report 113-251. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
I speak to the amendment.
What?
Yeah.
Does the gentleman rise as the designee from the gentleman from Pennsylvania? The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 1, printed in House Report Number 113-251, offered by Mr. Gibbs of Ohio.
Pursuant to House Resolution 385, the gentleman from Ohio, as the designee of the gentleman from Pennsylvania and a member opposed, will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the bipartisan manager's amendment. In this amendment, we provide clarity related to expediting projects while authorizing the Corps of Engineers to move to pre-construction, planning, engineering, and design activities immediately following a completed feasibility study. This will ensure work will continue without stops and starts in the study process. We authorize non-federal interests the ability to carry out work at their own expense pursuant to an unauthorized yet completed feasibility study if the non-federal interest agrees to carry out the work subject to any state or federal permitting requirements, and that the non-federal interests carry out the project in accordance with the feasibility study. We request that the Corps of Engineers to review the uses and economic feasibility of non-structural alternatives in the review of existing authorities for carrying out work after a storm event. And we have made technical and conforming changes to the bill. We developed this amendment working closely with members to address several key issues and to improve upon the underlying bill. Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves.
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, although I'm not opposed to the amendment, I ask unanimous consent to claim the time in opposition to the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this Schuster Amendment number 1 provides for the expediting the completion of ongoing feasibility studies and authorizes the Corps of Engineers to move to pre-construction planning, engineering, and design. It directs the Corps of Engineers to consider non-structural alternatives in the rebuilding of areas impacted by floods and storms. And in that regard, I am in support of the amendment, actually, and I'll yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Bishop.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank Mr. Rahal for yielding. I, too, am in support of this amendment. I particularly want to note and thank the chairman for the inclusion of language in this amendment that addresses 2 issues of concern. One, the inclusion of consideration of non-structural alternatives in preventing future storm damage. I think that's very important, particularly in the wake of Hurricane Sandy for those of us who live in the Northeast. And also language that allows the non-federal cost-share partner to begin work on issues that are of importance to their localities. So I think these are very important issues, important to members on our side, and I thank the chairman for including them. I yield back to Mr.
Gentleman
Rahal.
yields back. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from West Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Bastani.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the amendment and the underlying bill. I want to thank Chairman Schuster and Chairman Rahal and all of the committee for the tremendous work that was done to substantially improve the outlook on the use of the harbor maintenance tax, because these monies were not being used for dredging as they were intended to be, and this has severely hurt American competitiveness. If we're going to grow this economy, we have to expand international trade, and we have to have the maritime and port infrastructure to do so, and it's essential that these funds are used for the intended purpose. I also want to point out a couple of concerns I have in that there are 2 issues in the 2007 WRRDA bill, authorizations that require technical amendments that pertain to Louisiana authorizations, and I'm hopeful that as we go forward on this, the subcommittee chairman will work with me to achieve some resolution of this, because it's holding up Army Corps of Engineer projects, and it's something that would be very easy to fix. It's no cost, adds nothing to the budget. They're purely technical adjustments that need to be made, so I'm hopeful we can work through this as we go forward. And with that, I'm happy to yield back the balance of my time to the chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield to the gentlelady from South Dakota, Ms. Noem, for 1 minute.
The gentlelady from South Dakota is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly support the amendment and the underlying bill. I wanted to speak to one concern that I had. Mr. Chair, Congress has consistently limited the authority of the Corps of Engineers and recognized the long-established state water rights to protect federalism, and this bill is certainly no exception. In my state of South Dakota, in the upper Missouri Basin, the Corps is planning to charge for water from the Missouri River. This is after the Dakotas gave up hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland during the creation of the dams along the Missouri River, for which we have never been fully compensated. The issue of the Corps charging for surplus water is a concern for many communities, for tribes, for cities up and down the Missouri River. Chairman Schuster has assured me that he would work with us into the future to move forward on conferees to resolve this issue and to stop this attempt to tax our water. For that, I certainly appreciate the efforts, and with that, I will yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I recognize the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Cotton, for 30 seconds.
The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you. I want to thank the chairman and their committee for their hard work on WRRDA, which I'm pleased to support. I've offered an amendment that addresses an issue with the population growth projections of the 1958 Water Supply Act, which are outdated, and many local water districts are now forced to pay substantial principal and interest to the federal government on excess water supply. My amendment allows the Corps and local water districts to collaborate on finding new markets for their excess water storage. Not only does this partnership allow for the best use of shared resources, it also saves the taxpayers millions of dollars. Again, I want to thank the Transportation Committee, the Chairman, and the Ranking Member for their hard work on this bill and their support of my amendment. I yield back.
Time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of our time to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for a minute and a half.
Okay, thank you very much. First, I do want to thank the Chairman and also the Ranking Member and also Representative McCollum. Our amendment is on the Asian carp. It's a very invasive species that really has a devastating effect on the upper Mississippi River and the Ohio River Basin. This is a fish that can grow to 70 to 100 pounds. It's a voracious fish, it's highly invasive. It can potentially destroy a $7 billion commercial fishing business industry in the Great Lakes. It also would have a devastating effect on commercial boaters, recreational boaters, sportsmen. And again, I want you to understand that the nature of this fish is incredible. Anytime the surface of the water is disturbed, it comes out of the water, leaps out of the water. As I said, it can be 70 to 100 pounds. I know that many of us do boating in the summertime and have little children in the boats with us. This is a fish that is so aggressive and so voracious, it can eat sometimes up to 4 times its own weight. Now, what does this fish do? It eats everything that other fish eat. And if we allow this to come forward, it could be devastating. And this is a great example. And I've watched the last 3 weeks as both sides trying to get to some type of an agreement, couldn't get there. This is a bipartisan effort, a collective effort, collaborative effort that allows both the states and the federal agencies to work together on a solution to a problem that has been in existence now and will continue to be in existence until we stop it. So I want to, again, thank the gentleman. Chairman Schuster, thanks so much. The Ranking Member, thank you, and especially Mr. McCollum, as we work together on this piece of legislation that I think has a great effect on our ability to keep the Great Lakes safe, the upper Mississippi River, and the Ohio River Basin. I thank you, and I yield back.
Too much time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in House Report 113-251. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 2, printed in House Report Number 113-251, offered by Mr. DeFazio of Oregon.
Pursuant to House Resolution 385, the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon.
I thank the Chair. This amendment would delay the environmental shortcuts in Section 103 until the Secretary certifies that the Corps has significantly reduced the backlog of projects that have already been approved using the current environmental review process, already been approved. Now, the reason we're doing this is to make the point. This shortcut process could undermine environmental protections, well, would, and critical public participation under NEPA and other conservation laws. Combined with strict timelines and limited funding for feasibility studies, they guarantee the Corps will not have the information it needs to plan major projects with broad environmental impacts. There's no evidence that the public participation environmental review process has caused delay. In the hearings on 3080, no witness identified a single project where that had been the case. And when asked directly about why Corps projects take years to implement, the common answer was lack of available appropriations at critical times during project development and construction. The problem is not NEPA. The problem is that this Congress has failed to appropriate enough money to keep up with the projects we authorize. WRRDA 07 authorized $23 billion in new projects. Few have even been started. The estimated cost for completion of Corps projects currently under construction is another $20 billion. So in stark contrast, the most recent appropriation of the Corps' construction budget was $1.2 billion. If the Ryan budget is adopted, well, it was adopted in the House, not implemented, that number would be even lower, pathetically lower. Clearly, complying with NEPA and other environmental and public participation requirements is not the reason we have a backlog of projects worth billions of dollars. Congress should appropriate, and this bill is a start, the funding needed to allow these projects, which has already been approved, using all existing environmental review requirements, to be completed before we implement any new shortcuts. A more thoughtful approach would be, as we work through this backlog over the next 5, 6, 10, 15 years at the current rate of spending, or 25 or 50 years at Ryan rate of spending, would be to bifurcate the process. If we identified that there was a delay, particularly for repair, rehabilitation, replacement, minor projects, we could streamline those under the House or Senate provisions. But major projects should still go through a full review so that we don't end up later in endless litigation over those very same projects. With that, I would yield to the gentleman from Oregon. What? Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Go ahead, Mr.
For purposes, the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition.
I claim time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, gentlemen. H.R. 3080 was drafted in a bipartisan fashion. Our environmental streamlining provisions in Section 103 is a result of compromise. We have heard from many members who are supportive of our provisions to implement what is commonly called 3x3x3 process. However, in order for the Corps to have the flexibility to fit within the timeframes laid out in Section 101 of H.R. 3080, accelerating the environmental review process in Section 103 of the bill is critical. The amendment seeks to undermine all environmental streamlining provisions in WRRDA. Regardless of the existence of backlogs, streamlining environmental reviews is an essential reform, and I believe will help to reduce backlogs. Additionally, reforms in WRRDA provide opportunities for non-federal interest and private sectors and other private sectors to move projects forward with their own funds, providing incentive for accelerating these project delivery processes regardless of the availability of federal funding. So I urge all members to oppose the amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Oregon.
Requires the balance of the time I remain.
Gentleman has 2.5 minutes.
Okay. Going to have a minute and a half roll. I'm going to yield to the gentleman from Oregon a minute and a half.
Gentleman's recognized for a minute and a half.
I appreciate the gentleman. And what he said is correct in terms of a situation here. Streamlining provisions in this bill provide nothing but an empty promise that projects will be able faster. The empty promise comes with real cost. It will lead to more damaging and costly projects and prevent states, local governments, and other stakeholders from making realistic plans for the future. The Corps currently has an estimated backlog of over 1,000 authorized activities that will take about $60 billion. The bill before us adds to the backlog. Both the Corps themselves and the administration have pointed out that these proposed streamlining guidelines may actually slow project development and do not adequately protect communities, taxpayers, and the environment. The real cause of delay is limited funding, competition for funding amongst the extensive study and project construction backlog, poor project planning that does not focus on national priorities or identifying the least possible damaging solution to water resource problems. Project studies take the longest when the Corps and Congress insist on pushing outdated, damaging, and extremely costly projects that inconvenience or even harm communities, instead of adapting low-impact, modern solutions that could more easily gain broad-based support. I'm all for getting projects done faster, but our infrastructure deficit slows the economy and puts people at physical danger at worst. We need to address that problem. Undercutting the environmental protections does not address it. It merely complicates it.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Is the gentleman from Oregon prepared to close?
I have one more speaker.
Then I'll continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Oregon.
Yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Texas. There she is, Ms. Sheila Jackson-Lee.
The gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman from Oregon. I thank the sponsors of this legislation, both Mr. Blumenauer, and I'm delighted, along with Mr. DeFazio, to be a co-sponsor. And really just want to emphasize the core values of what Mr. DeFazio and what this amendment represents. The fact is there is a lack of funding for those of us who are around ports, who are experiencing extreme flooding. There is a lack of funding that the environmental review process has nothing to do with. And it has not led to the backlog of authorized projects that are not being constructed. So I support the timely delivery of water resources projects. I have concerns as to whether the changes made in this bill in the name of streamlining will actually achieve that goal. And so I ask and urge my members, colleagues on both sides of the aisle, to support this amendment, which will make the construction of already authorized projects that clearly had no problems with the environmental review process a priority. And I would argue the fact that we should be encouraged to make this truly a jobs bill and support the DeFazio amendment.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
May I inquire as to how much time I have remaining?
The gentleman from Pennsylvania has 4 minutes remaining.
I'll yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon.
His time has expired.
Well,
I just yield him 2 minutes.
Oh, I thank the gentleman.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I yield to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lee.
How much?
2 minutes. That's what he just told me. Or a minute and a half.
For 2 minutes.
And I'll close. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank the gentleman for yielding and want to thank you and all of the co-sponsors of this amendment for putting this forward. It would actually delay the so-called environmental streamlining provisions in this bill, which would fast-track the critical review process and significantly limit public input. This amendment would also preserve the current review process that helps the Army Corps of Engineers foresee harmful environmental impacts before undertaking any project. Mr. Speaker, this safe, sustainable infrastructure, it's not really produced by cutting corners. WRRDA projects, and I have several in my district, and I know how complex they can be. They have wide-ranging consequences. It's important to fully understand the effects that these projects will have on public health, public safety, and the environment. History, quite frankly, has shown us that robust environmental reviews are good for the environment, the economy, public safety, and taxpayers. This bipartisan amendment would protect the environment and really save taxpayer dollars. So I urge a yea vote, and I thank the gentleman for yielding and for his tremendous leadership on this.
Gentlewoman yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Well, I would
believe the gentleman still has an additional 30 seconds on the time.
Yeah.
It's recognized for 30 seconds.
Okay. I thank the Chairman for his generosity. I think there's substantial agreement here. We need to put more investment into critical water infrastructure projects. This bill begins to do that. But we want to do it in the most thoughtful way possible. Some of these projects will alter local or regional environmental resources forever, sometimes to mitigate, sometimes perhaps not so much if they're not well thought out. Many of these projects are designed to last for 100 years or more. It certainly would behoove us to spend a little bit of a time fully vetting these projects before we authorize them and move forward. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance.
I yield back the balance.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I yield back the balance of my time and urge a no vote on the DeFazio amendment.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the noes have it.
Mr.
The
Chairman,
amendment is not
on that,
agreed.
I'd ask
a
recorded vote. I'd ask a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6, Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 3, printed in House Report 113-251. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 113-251, offered by Mr. Flores of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 385, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I rise today to offer an amendment that addresses a burdensome executive order that will have vast impacts on both our ocean and inland economies. Executive Order 13547 was signed in 2010 and requires various
bureaucracies essentially zone the ocean and the sources thereof. This means that a drop of rain that falls on your house can be subject to this overreaching policy because that precipitation will ultimately wind up in the ocean. The new policy guidelines under this executive order that were finalized in April of this year have the potential to change permitting criteria and regulatory requirements for a large number of economic sectors, including maritime shipping and inland river transportation. The Army Corps of Engineers is participating in at least one ocean and marine spatial planning regional team requiring resources and staff time outside of their current statutory obligations and outside of their current budgetary authority. Since the Corps has not specifically asked for funds for the purpose of implementing Executive Order 13547, then they are raiding existing accounts to fund these activities, thus adding to the current project's backlog and misusing scarce taxpayer resources. Furthermore, the Senate WRRDA bill includes a funding stream for regional planning bodies pursuant to the administration's National Ocean Policy, thereby creating a permanent slush fund to bankroll implementation of their ocean zoning initiative that hasn't even received congressional authorization. My amendment would prohibit the programs or actions authorized under WRRDA from being used to further implement ocean zoning under the executive order, and further requires that the Secretary of the Army conduct and submit a study to Congress detailing all of the activities engaged in and resources expended relating to the executive order and to the National Ocean Policy, as well as relevant FY 2014 budget request. I want to thank the T&I Committee for their hard work on the WRRDA bill. I look forward to voting for the WRRDA bill, and I'd urge approval of my amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Who seek recognition? Gentleman, what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I yield my